Thanks for joining us with our presentation. I'm Allison, and this is Matt, like you needed clarification with that. Matt Florell is the owner of the ViciDial group and also the creator of the ViciDial open source call center suite, which is about 10 years old now. Probably next year is the 10-year anniversary. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Matt and I have attended pretty much every Astricon, North American Astricon.
Yeah.
And every time we see each other every year, we always kind of kibitz about nightmare stories with IVRs that I've had to record and IVRs that he has collaborated with clients to write. We're always very respectful. We love our customers, but there's always kind of a spirit of almost trying to top each other with, oh yeah, well you wouldn't believe what one of my clients had me record. And he says, you wouldn't believe what they wrote in their phone tree. So it's almost like we're trying to outgross each other with stories. So then, instead of having the feeling of complaining about stuff, Matt and I thought, well, let's do a co-presentation as a little bit of a public service to discuss ways in which IVR systems get unnecessarily complicated, and in doing so get way more expensive. It becomes an onerous task that just gets put off. And so we're going to offer some solutions and identify some common problems that get in the way of people writing IVRs.
Very good.
So, did we jump ahead there?
No, this is the next slide.
Right, okay. So basically, if you find yourself in a position of, as I alluded to, either putting off the writing of your phone tree, the actual scripting of your phone prompts, and it just becomes something that you can't even deal with, you are in your IVR's way. It's almost as though you are getting in the way of a successful phone tree that flows well for your customers to maneuver through. So Matt will outline some of his nightmare stories.
Yes, these are my nightmare stories. Case number one of getting in your IVR's way, 6 conference calls over 2 months for 8 prompts. Now this was a rather large company, but this is a perfect example of creation by committee or leadership by committee, which, as anybody who's been on a committee with no leader knows, can go on forever. These conference calls were at a minimum 1 hour in length. The longest one, I believe, was 3 hours. And we spent the better part of an hour arguing over such things as, should it be press 1 for yes, or should it be for yes, press 1? That got very old. I actually tuned out several times during some of these calls as they were arguing amongst each other. But that's a perfect example of how not to create an IVR system. To have too many cooks in the kitchen is a bad idea. We've also, and this was a different company, a survey that had 5 questions. And we went up to 18 drafts as each executive VP in the company put their stamp on the survey drafts, some of them undoing changes that others had done, and some of them requesting that they have their changes made back again. And again, luckily I was not involved in most of these, but conference calls amongst themselves to argue about such things as, should we put the word is in here? And going through these drafts, which often did not have changes marked on the document, I would have to copy and paste them into a lovely programmer's tool, a WinMerge, that shows you differences between versions. And sometimes it was as simple as 1 word that had changed. This took over 6 months for this 5-question survey to be completed by this company. And then the king of them all, a phone tree taking the better part of a year to design. This was a case of somebody who really didn't want to do it and just kept putting it off and liked to blame us for it not being done, and then we would just resend our questions to them, and then they would say, well, they're not done with this. Like, well, you need to answer the questions I sent, or this isn't going to work. that also had several cooks in the kitchen, but it did take a year for that whole process to be completed. And
So
let's see,
typically, people will send to me what is known as a schematic or schemagram, which I have dubbed the Corleone family tree because it's extremely complicated, very convoluted, and really, Matt and I have discussed this at length. It's a great way for programmers and the writers of IVR scripts to get clear on your various mailboxes and what prompts need to be assigned there. However, this format, actually, I think the next slide.
now, I don't know where it went.
Yeah, that's very strange. Okay. We'll have to find it. Oh, yeah, here it is. Here's the traditional
I think
Corleone family tree. Yeah, see, there we go.
we are missing, I don't know. how
Oh,
the
very
heck that
strange.
happened.
Okay. When presentations go wrong. That's
Yeah.
okay. Okay.
This worked great in the walkthrough.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, see, there you go. Okay. Yeah, so anyhow, the schematic, okay.
Let's see
Yeah,
if
the
that's still
schematic
not showing up.
is a great way, as I say, to get organized, to try to figure out exactly where extensions should get forwarded to. But it does start to resemble the Corleone family tree. Believe it or not, some people will actually send that to me to record, which is incredibly confusing for the main reason that many of those prompts are actually instructions or notes, internal notes within the company, and are not meant to be recorded. So it's actually kind of hard to figure out exactly what is a prompt and what is kind of a background note. So,
and this is actually page 2 of a multi-page document that a client sent me, and this was all I got. This was for payment IVR. I had to print this out on about 8 pages per page to fully visualize what the heck was going on, because even blown up to, what is this, about 15 feet, you still can't read everything that's on it.
was it color-coded when they sent it to you, or did you do that?
They did color code it,
Okay.
and that's, I'm
it
not
has
sure
that
that
going
helps
for it.
much, but you see the green and the red were other pages that led off of this page.
Yeah.
And this is all they gave me. They gave me this, and then they gave me about 50 or 60 prompts. And it turns out they couldn't even follow this very well because they were missing prompts. So this is a perfect example of, this may be good in the conceptual stage, but when you go to execute it, it's a nightmare. And Allison and I have both received schemagrams like this that make it very difficult to write or execute the IVR in a practical way.
And it's interesting when I ask for a client to take that schemagram and boil it down into a prompt that I can use, quite often they'll say to me, oh, well, I don't know how to do that, or that sounds really labor intensive. And I always say, well, yeah. And it's even more so to record it directly from that format. So the problem with that, obviously, it's excessively complex. It's needlessly complicated. The schematics are good, as I say, for plotting out, walking through it, figuring out what you need, and visually mapping out the flow helps to identify any gaps or omissions of mailboxes. Sometimes it doesn't come out unless you actually plot it out in that very linear way. It's an invaluable tool for programming, and it's a great start, but
Yeah, I think we're missing.
yeah, we're kind of out of sequence there. Yeah, it's
I'm
not
sorry
usable
about that.
either for voice talent or for programmers as well. Yes. Okay, here we go. Yes, we need something
Sorry
more
about that.
linear, a little bit more of a step-by-step flow, definitely uncluttered, and gosh, yeah, let's go for the non-confusing. If you're confused by it, so will everyone else who has to work with it.
Case 3, leaving the customer out of the loop. This is a very common thing we see with several of our clients, usually the ones that don't put much thought at all into their IVR, kind of the opposite of the problem of too many people looking at it. No option for press 0, either for live agent or for anything else. We have this great IVR call flow report that shows what customers have pressed and what menus they went into, and it's very useful to see where your customers are going. And invariably, when we have a client that does not have press 0 options, towards the bottom we'll always see because pressing 0, if it doesn't have an option, goes back to the invalid. So we'll just see at the bottom about 50 invalids in a row of just somebody pushing 0 constantly trying to get through to a human. And that kind of skews the report. But that's a good symptom of this kind of problem. You're leaving out options for your customers to take a way out of the never-ending phone tree in some case. Another example of leaving customers out of the loop, we've had clients that have put basically commercials or radio commercials as the opening message with no option to get out of it. So it's a playback in asterisk instead of a background, meaning you have to go through this whole advertisement before you can press anything. The worst example was an almost 2.5-minute advertisement, and I'm not going to tell you who the client was or what the product was because that'll give away who the client was, but they saw a very low call-in rate, and the people that called in generally were not very happy that they couldn't escape from this never-ending ad. You know, they knew about the company, that's why they called the phone number. The best place to put those commercials is in music on hold. While the customer's waiting, they expect to hear something, and they won't be too aggravated hearing that if they don't have to wait for that before they can even press something to get to a human.
Yeah, one of my favorite examples of that was a cardiology clinic that I did the opening message for, and their message actually did go on for about 2 minutes, and then the very last option was, if this is a medical emergency, hang up and dial 911. No, if somebody's made the mistake of calling with crushing chest pains, let's put that prompt first, but also don't take up too much time by telling the background of the clinic, how long you've been in business, the services you offer. As Matt says, that's appropriate in an on-hold system, not so much in an opening prompt.
And not paying attention to high drop rates, that's also something that's important to note. We do have clients that don't mind when their drop rate is 20 or 30%, which is a bit confusing. But that's something, if you care about your customers' time and patience, you should really look into. Let's see, I'm going to see if we're
this is crazy. We
losing any other
apologize. This worked
random
really well.
slides. No, it doesn't look like any other. I don't know why those are marked
Okay.
like that.
They reshuffled themselves. Yes. Okay.
Serious problems.
Tell me about it. Simple solutions. Yes. Okay. So getting back to case 1, to remind you, Matt talked about the conference calls that stretched over 8 months for very, very few prompts, survey with way too many drafts, a phone tree taking better part of the year to design.
Solution, don't overthink it. There needs to be a happy medium between underthinking and overthinking. Assigning someone to have authority over phone tree design. This is probably the #1 recommendation we make when companies come to us and it seems like they might be heading down the track of overthinking it or creation by committee. You have to have somebody that is in charge, because not having somebody in charge will create extensive delays and a lot of other problems along the way, and never-ending revisions. We had one client that revised it a week after it went live. So, and it was a survey. It wasn't the survey mentioned here, but they got about halfway done with their whole survey process, and then they decided to change it. And I mentioned to them, this is probably going to skew your statistics at the end because you're changing what the beginning half and the end half of the survey are going to be hearing. Mm-hmm. And they said, oh, well, we didn't think of that.
Well, I mean, sometimes people don't really know how effective a survey or prompts are going to be unless they actually hear it on its feet. So, I sort of understand that maybe it's a little hard to predict how it's going to hear to the caller until they actually hear it. But yes, as you say, it could actually affect the statistics and the outcome.
And that was one example of a group that had a horrible problem overthinking it and ended up underthinking some things that they were too busy thinking about the details and specific wording that they didn't bother to think about the whole project as a whole. Don't give the client too much latitude. That's different on some, or difficult in some cases, but giving them a set of narrow parameters is often a very good way, especially if you're familiar with them and you think that they might have a tendency to try to throw everything in the kitchen sink into the survey. You want to try to give them narrowing, guiding parameters or help them to narrow their scope, because we've seen things that just spiraled out of control because they kept adding and adding and adding, and the project would never end, just like phone trees. The last line in bold capital letters, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to work. That's another good thing you can tell the overthinkers in order to get them to move on.
And you know, I think often prompts have to go through a legal department, especially if you're dealing with a large entity. So that could be part of the bottleneck in itself, is that quite often they will have to wait for scripts to be approved through legal, and that the wording has to be incredibly exact to protect them. But yeah, I mean, that line is in bold for a reason. This is the one takeaway that we want you to remember. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to work. Oh yeah, quite often. I'm actually hired by a company that produces sound files of those. You know, if you're reading a magazine and you see a medication and it has all the side effects and the contraindications, they need those read for the sight impaired. So I've had to read a lot of those, and they're very, very lengthy, and luckily not as fast as they want them read in the commercials. No. No, like the commercials, side effects may include blah, 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 blah. Yeah, no, luckily it's real time. Yeah. Okay. What do we have next? We've seen that one. Well.
Yeah, well, this is the problem.
This is crazy.
And this is the solution, or a piece of the solution.
Yes.
Both for IVR builders and eventually developing a script, detailing all of the options in each step is very important. So quite literally, each one of these tiny little things needs to have a breakout, or we often get these from clients or suggest from clients, use Microsoft Excel or OpenOffice spreadsheet, and just have a tab for every one of your options. And in this case, it's the Acme anvil supply. If you're having a Roadrunner problem, please press 3.
I wish I could do their IVR. I've never been asked.
But this is an example that gives you the prompt, each of the press options, a timeout option, invalid option, and in the case of ViciDial, we offer second invalid and third invalid options, where a first invalid could just go back to the main prompt, and then by the time you've put an invalid entry 3 times, it just goes on somewhere else. So this is a good example of the steps of what builds each portion of that huge schemagram. Lets you know where the calls should go on the various actions that happen. In some cases, we've got clients that do database dips. You know, if this field is an M for male, then go down this tree, and if it's F for female, then go down this tree. And all of those kind of things can be built into something like this that's fairly simple. There are really no questions when you build it out to this level of detail. You don't have to write teeny little notes on your 8-page printout of each page like I had to do for the nightmare scenario here.
Well, and to capitalize on Matt's idea about the spreadsheet, make sure that if you're using a spreadsheet that you're not using like an Excel spreadsheet that will extend horizontally for several pages, because I've been known to tape pages together because I didn't know how to format it before.
Yes,
so,
wrap.
yeah, just make sure that the entire prompt appears on the same page, just so it's easy to read. It's common sense.
Word wrap is important.
Yes,
and it's
absolutely.
easy to set.
Yeah.
So either you get it going on forever, or you just get this red triangle that lets you know there's more. And then you have to click on it to see what it is. And for Allison's point of view, once you have that schemagram spreadsheet, it's easy to take your file names and your prompts from that and just copy those, or just send it as is to Allison, and she can get the file names and the prompts out of it. And
This is like my favorite format ever because it's uncomplicated. There's no question about where the prompt begins and ends. And the naming convention is something I want to mention. Doing the underscores is fine. Try to keep it as short as possible. Believe it or not, you see the prompt that says your account number is the 7-digit number, blah, blah, blah. Some people have actually named the file your underscore account underscore number underscore is underscore. I'm not kidding. They just have the entire prompt just broken up with underscores. And I charge by the hour, and I'm still charging when I'm editing files, which means typing in the file names. So, yeah, just make sure it's short.
Our case 3 was leaving the customer out of the loop, no option for pressing 0, having a commercial in the opening prompt, not tracking or disregarding high drop rates. The solution, provide an opt-out. Even if it's leaving a voicemail message or something like that, giving the customer a way to get out of the queue or get out of that welcome message, make it if you want to hear our commercial, press 8 or something like that. If you really have to have it in there, be sensitive to your customers' costs, time, and patience. If they are calling in, we had one of our clients, I don't think anybody knows them because they're a Pakistani cell phone provider, would literally have an average hold time of 3.5 hours. And we brought this up and we're like, wow, what's going on? You're a cell phone provider, and a lot of these people are calling in on their cell phones and they're waiting 3.5 hours. I'm like, oh, that's fine. Like they're using their cell phone minutes. I'm like, wow, okay. They had a rather large system and they had a rather extensive IVR tree, but that's an extreme example of not caring about your customers' time or costs or patience. Don't front load the prompt. Don't go into a long explanation before you start giving options. It's better just to give simple options up front and specify them later if possible. Track your drop call rate. That's very important. Having a high drop rate means there's something wrong and you probably have upset customers. And if they do finally get to an agent, they're probably going to be less happy than if they were able to get to an agent quicker. That usually involves proper staffing and some other things, but it's the symptom of a problem. And seeing that you have a high drop rate is something that has many different ways that you can fix it. Outsource call center providers, having your marketing department let your production group know that maybe they're putting an ad on the Rush Limbaugh radio show and you should be expecting 15,000 phone calls in an hour. That would be a good thing. That's actually happened. They did not overstaff. They did not have an overflow. They just filled up. Luckily, they didn't crash, but talk about high wait times. Pay attention to feedback. Don't be a closed door type of system where your agents are telling you, well, this customer somehow got to the sales group and they wanted to call in for support. They didn't want to buy anything. They wanted to buy, or they needed refills or something like that. We've had several cases of things like that where I went and did an on-site training at a company and we were talking to agents, and the agents were telling us things that apparently they'd been telling their supervisors, but nobody had bothered to tell the people that controlled their IVR or their phone system. And months on end, they had a misrouting in their system where it was they had about a dozen numbers, and one of the numbers, it was press 1 for sales and 2 for support or something like that. And they had reversed them. And so there was just months of transfers between the support and the sales group where they'd call up and they'd say, yes, hello, this is support. And they just never passed it up the chain. So that can happen, and you do need to listen to your people that are actually on the phone. Caller ID database tracking. This is something we have several clients using where you can actually look at the caller ID number coming in and identify them. For instance, if it is a sales group and you have an existing customer calling in, you could take that call out of the sales group path and send it into the support group path. We kind of tweaked our blacklist function to allow it to do alternate routing like that. So we have clients that use do CRM lookups to identify clients or identify what they might call marquee clients, the high dollar clients that buy from them a lot, and send them to a higher priority group of salespeople. That's all doable inside of Asterisk, inside of ViciDial, and a lot of other IVR systems. And that can, again, prioritize your top customers and make them feel special and get more money from them. And be proactive with the changes. Don't test your system, basically. Don't wait for things to go wrong. Look for things and test things. Testing is very important in IVRs as it is with a lot of other things. Don't just throw it up there, but actually actively use it. Have people who have not been involved in the design process for 2 months dial in and try to use it. Tell them you're trying to see support on this product and see how long it takes you to get there. That's another good method. Having a new set of eyes or a new set of ears listen in on the phone that you've built or you've helped build is a very good way of getting perspective from somebody who isn't deep in the process.
So just as a way of summarizing what we've been talking about, designing an IVR can be a chore, but largely because we overthink it. We just really obsess about the process probably too much, and that gets in your way. It's cluttered and complicated, and if it is, it will lead to a high call drop rate and customer dissatisfaction. It just goes to follow. And we err on the side of thinking that it needs to be perfect when really it just has to work. I know we're hammering that home, but yep, it just has to work. That's all. So I think that's the end of our little presentation. We're interested in fielding questions because this is an area that doesn't really get a lot of treatment. Generally at conventions of this kind, and even Astricon, people don't really dig too much into the underbelly of IVR. So any questions at all, we're happy to answer those. Yes?
Actually, what do you guys use, and I heard you mention something about IVR reporting. What do you use for Asterisk-based systems as far as IVR analytics, where calls are dropping, how many times are selecting options, so on?
We, in ViciDial, we built something in. Now, ViciDial is open source and free, but we use something we call a call menuing system. It's very similar in layout to how FreePBX does it, but everything's logged to a database. And so you can see, we have an IVR report that allows you to see how far customers get in the path and how many customers took that route, whether it made it into a queue at that path, and what the drop rate was from there. That's just a built-in. There aren't too many IVR reporting systems out there. Even Qmetrics will only show you the last step before it got into the queue, and I know that's been something I've been bugging Lorenzo about. He's actually here if you want to bug him in the expo hall. He rarely leaves his home other than to go to work, so this is like the first conference he's been to in years, but go bug him about that. IVR tracking tools in Qmetrics. I'm sure he would do a really good job at it. Ours are pretty simple. They just show literally the call menu ID of each step that the call goes through. And it shows you the number of calls that have gone into it and the number of unique caller IDs that have gone into it. So that's just something we built. It wasn't very easy to figure out how to do that initially, but I don't really know of too many other IVR tracking reporting mechanisms.
Patrick, did you have a question over there?
Yeah, so your online marquee list of clients that get
Special treatment?
special treatment right at me. Yeah, you're not. So, sort of a follow-up question to that. When you have a client that drops off, is there a way that you can tell that that's a client that drops off because they're angry, or because with the IVR system, or one that says I've gotten my information from the IVR, this call has reached its logical conclusion, but I'm hanging out.
It kind of depends on where you are. We have several clients that have what I like to call informational IVR trees. where they put, for instructions on how to change the blade on your skill saw, press 3. That's very common, where that would be the last step after they've pressed 3 and listened to how to change the blade, sometimes over and over again. That answers their question. And sometimes, after the end of the question, it asks if you need help, if you would like help from a support person, press 4 or whatever after that. So
Them to figure out if they've gotten the information that they want, is a good way to assign that.
I've been through IVRs. I can't think of any clients I've actually set up IVRs like that for, but there's the question, you see it on the web all the time, did this help you? If this helped you, press 1. If not, press 2. And if you do 2, then would you like to talk to a human? That can certainly work. We've also, if you have a lot of money and you can afford a speech analysis type process that actually analyzes recordings to detect certain words like curse words, and these do exist, and they're very expensive, but you go to some of the big call center shows, and there are about a half a dozen companies that offer customer phone recording analysis, and they pick out keywords, and they pick out stress levels in the voice, and they'll give you a report that will show you all of these things, and the percentage of anxiety in your callers and things like that. So those start at somewhere around $1,000 per concurrent channel. They're very expensive, and you need separate hardware, and but it's pretty neat to look at them.
Yeah, but that doesn't really address, the emotional level of when somebody hung up, or how somebody hung up, and at what point in the process they hung up. Yeah, it's really hard to hang up mad with an iPhone.
Angry hang up.
It's just, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Questions? These are great. Yes. Hi. Oh, I know. I know. If you watch any child playing with a toy phone, they know how to end the call. They go like this. And they put this whole, to end this call, press 0 or star or whatever. Yeah, I want to see that phased right out, because I think by now people know what to do. It's a very
Doesn't
good point.
Comedian Mail have that?
Yes.
Asterix's own
That's right.
voicemail
Yep.
system has,
That's right.
I think it's star or pound to end this call. Hang up or press pound.
So crazy. I think people know by.
A specific client that had really good call flows, or definitely not Sprint. They have the voice recognition thing that's always wrong, and would you like to cancel your service? No, support, representative, support. And pressing buttons does nothing. I still have problems with, for some reason, the voice recognition systems don't like my voice. But
I've called companies. I was trying to order, and it was me on the system taking my order. And I said to myself, would you like sales, distribution, or, just tell me what you're looking for. And I said, sales. And so then I answered back, okay, I think you said shipping. If I can't understand me, what hope do I have? Yeah.
I can think of a couple of our clients that have very simple, really simple is best. Thank you for calling, Acme Widgets. It's always the example I like to use. For sales, press 1. For support, press 2. Or para español, número 2. I've heard that enough. I know I can actually say it, but I don't know much else Spanish. But really just keeping it simple and getting the customer to a human is most often the best way. We have, if that's not really an option, we do have a few infomercial type clients that do a lot of support for infomercials, and they'll have a lot of those instructional IVRs, as I described. To change the blade on your skill saw, or for instructions, press 1. And they have these huge phone trees, or they're never more than 4 or 5 levels deep, but they give you a lot of options, and they aren't really verbose about it. They've got somebody whose only job it is to manage their IVRs, because they have, I think in our system, they have somewhere close to 850 call menus that are tied together in different ways. They've got 770 DIDs and I think 250 campaigns. It's a big company, and they handle a lot of products. They're an outsourcer. But they really, they've got somebody whose only job it is to build those, and really keeping it simple, keeping it shallow, not too many steps, and just speaking in plain simple English is always good.
Any other questions? Oh, yep, one back there. Nice and loud there, John. What's taking up all that time? That's what I want to know. Like, what are they saying for 50 seconds? Or yeah,
Once I realized the way it worked, I gave myself a direct dial in, so I didn't have to do it.
What you can do is you can recognize their caller ID numbers and make them go through the same thing that you go through, that their customers go through. And they'll say, "Why'd you change your phone system? That's really annoying. I just want to talk to you."
yeah.
Funny you should mention that.
I was just wondering if you run into they're really happy with it the way it is.
Yeah. Well, you know what I encourage people to do is, it would be like a standard opening. Thank you for calling XYZ Widgets, where we make the best widgets around. If you want to hear more about our widgets, go to a dedicated line that will tell them more, or save that for the on-hold program. But yeah, get to those phone menus, or the choices in the menu. For crushing chest pains, yeah. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I just urge them to make it as abbreviated as possible, I guess. Yeah. Sorry, I wish we had more concrete stuff, but if they love their system, it's really hard to talk them out of it. Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think we're running out of time. Oh, maybe we can just take one quick one. Yeah.
How do you collect feedback from callers on your IVR
Good question.
if it's not
Well, I've seen that happen a few times when calling into large companies, where if you would be willing to take a survey after this call, press 1 or something like that. I know that happens a lot on the web as well. I think it was I was calling a bank that I have an account with that did something like that, and as soon as I hung up with the agent, it wasn't a hang up. It was the agent transferred me to a survey, and it was a simple 3-question survey. Did we answer your questions? Were we able to help you? That kind of thing. So that does exist. That does happen. You can program systems to do that. Asterisk, ViciDial. I can't think of any of our clients that are doing anything like that, but it certainly is possible.
Yep.
I don't know what kind of participation level you're going to see, or for the chance to win $1,000, would you like to give us feedback? That might influence the kind of feedback you get,
Yep.
but that's one way to get participation.
Well, thanks, everybody. We'll both be around for questions. This is how to get a hold of us, or our addresses. So thank you.